They thought they were going to silence her. In a courtroom packed with senators, veterans, and cameras rolling live to over 20 million Americans, Justice Clarence Thomas accused Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett of treason and threatened to send her to prison on the spot. But what no one knew was that Jasmine didn't come alone. She came with truth. And once she opened her briefcase, America would never be the same. Because inside was a letter so raw, so devastating, it made jurors weep and the judge's hands tremble. What followed wasn't a trial, it was a funeral for silence and a reckoning decades overdue. If you've ever felt like the government hides the truth, or that the powerful get away with burying the past, this story will hit you hard. So before we begin, hit like, tap subscribe, and leave a comment if you believe truth should never stay classified. Because today, one woman stood up and made the system regret underestimating her. Cold, gray, the kind of morning where even Washington, D.C. felt like it was holding its breath. Outside the federal courthouse, a low fog rolled off the Potomac and settled in the alleys and over the marble steps like a warning. Reporters huddled under umbrellas. Cameramen checked their lenses. There was a heaviness in the air, the kind that people feel in their chest before something irreversible happens. Courtroom 3B had never seen a crowd like this. Every seat was filled. Senators, military officials, federal investigators, and pundits from every major news network. The gallery buzzed with tension. The murmurs weren't gossip, they were nerves. The night before, leaks had hit the news. Whispers that a sitting member of Congress had committed an act of betrayal involving a top-secret military operation. Names swirled, rumors caught fire, but no one expected her. At 8:59 a.m., the heavy oak doors opened, and everything stopped. Jasmine Crockett walked in alone. No legal team, no entourage, no aides whispering strategy. Just her. Shoulders back, head high, a navy blue suit, crisp as Judgment Day, and in her right hand, a battered leather briefcase that looked older than the courtroom itself. Click, click, click. Her heels echoed with surgical precision against the floor. She didn't look at the press. She didn't look at the senators lined in the back row. She didn't even look at the judge. She looked forward. And in that moment, every eye in the room followed her. Because they realized something the cameras hadn't captured yet. She wasn't afraid. Some whispered, "Why is she alone? Where's her team? Is she out of her mind?" One smirked. Another snickered. But they didn't see the quiet war behind her eyes. They didn't know what she carried in that briefcase. They didn't realize that a woman who walks into a courtroom alone isn't weak. She's dangerous. Because she has nothing left to protect but the truth. She sat, calm, composed, hands folded on the table, and then the door at the front of the courtroom opened. Justice Clarence Thomas entered with the gravity of a man who'd made up his mind long before he put on the robe that morning. He didn't smile. He didn't wait for introductions. He just began. "Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett," he said, his voice deep, precise, cold. "This court is in possession of classified evidence, indicating that you willfully withheld intelligence related to Operation Hollow River." He paused. "You are hereby accused of treason against the United States of America." Gasps erupted. Even the cameras flinched. Reporters blinked, stunned. A man in the second row muttered, "Jesus Christ." A woman dropped her pen, and one of the aides in the back actually smiled. To them, this was the end of Jasmine Crockett. A career extinguished in real time, live, unfiltered. But the woman at the center of it all didn't flinch. She stood, slowly. No dramatics, no rush. Her chair scraped softly across the stone floor. She placed both hands flat on the table, looked directly at Justice Thomas, and asked a single question. "Are you sure you want this?" No one breathed. It wasn't defiance. It wasn't bravado. It was certainty. The kind of certainty that comes from knowing something the judge didn't. And for the first time that morning, Clarence Thomas blinked, just once. Something shifted in his expression. Not fear, not anger, but calculation. A recognition that Jasmine Crockett didn't walk into that courtroom hoping for mercy. She walked in carrying something more dangerous than lawyers or arguments or applause. She walked in with memory. She walked in with truth. And the silence that followed was not empty. It was heavy. Heavy with the weight of everything that had never been said in that room, everything that had been redacted, erased, and buried, and she was about to exhume it all. Jasmine Crockett didn't move for a full 30 seconds. The courtroom was still reeling from her question. "Are you sure you want this?" It echoed not just in the chamber, but across the country. By now, social media was already flooded with clips, subtitles, hashtags, speculation. But none of them, not the tweets, not the headlines, knew what was coming next. She didn't reach for a document. She reached for memory. Jasmine unlatched the worn leather briefcase. The click was quiet, but it felt like thunder in that room. With calm fingers, she lifted a single folded piece of paper, creased, frayed, the ink slightly faded. It wasn't in an envelope, it wasn't typed, it wasn't official, but the way she held it, like glass, told everyone it was sacred. She looked up. "This isn't evidence," she said. Her voice was soft, but it carried. "This is a letter from a woman named Eloise Wilkins." The name didn't trigger recognition, not yet, but the weight in her voice did. She buried her son 2 years ago, Private First Class Darius Wilkins. Now the ripple started. Some people remembered a quiet funeral, no answers, no medals, just folded flags and forced silence. Jasmine unfolded the letter with care. A few jurors leaned forward. A man in uniform in the back row sat up straighter. Then she began to read. "My name is Eloise Wilkins. My son was Private First Class Darius Elijah Wilkins. He was my only child. He died 2 years ago during something called Operation Hollow River. They didn't tell me how. They didn't tell me why. They just sent a flag and a pamphlet about heroism. But I know my boy. He called me every week. He wrote me letters I still read at night. He had questions. He had doubts. He didn't know why they were out there or what they were really doing. He just knew he had to follow orders. After he died, I asked questions. The Army told me it was classified. They said national security. But what about a mother's security? What about the truth a parent deserves? I begged. They went silent. I screamed. They hung up. So I started writing. To senators, to watchdogs, to God. This is the only letter anyone ever answered. Congresswoman Crockett didn't send me a form letter. She came to my porch. She sat in Darius's chair. She held his photo and cried with me. And I gave her this letter. If you're reading this out loud, Jasmine, it means they tried to silence you too. But I know you. You won't let them. I don't want revenge. I want recognition. I want my son's name spoken with honor, not just on a plaque, but in the truth. Because if we can send them to die, we can say how it happened, and we can say their names without shame. Jasmine paused. There wasn't a sound, not a cough, not a whisper. A woman in the second row gripped her purse until her knuckles turned white. One of the stenographers had tears pooling just above her glasses. Even the court officers, stoic still, stood frozen. Because what they had just heard wasn't politics. It was something sacred. Jasmine gently folded the letter back. Her fingers trembled slightly. That woman, she said, never got closure. She got silence. And a burial detail that wouldn't meet her eyes. She looked at the judge. And now, she gets a courtroom. She gets you. And she gets this room to feel what it means to lose someone. Not just to war, but to secrecy. Justice Thomas shifted. Only slightly, but it was enough. You called me here today, Jasmine said, her voice low and unwavering, to ask about betrayal. Well, let me tell you what betrayal looks like. She lifted the letter. It looks like a mother who had to bury an empty coffin because the autopsy was redacted. A gasp. It looks like a family who never got the last phone call because it was wiped from the records. A hand over a mouth in the front row. It looks like a nation that calls soldiers heroes but leaves their mothers talking to walls at night. Now the silence was personal, not performance, not protocol. People were crying. One of the jurors wiped his glasses. A man in uniform looked down and didn't raise his head again. Jasmine looked up. Thomas, but you didn't know that letter was sitting in my hands. You didn't know that the mother of a fallen soldier had already armed me with something no courtroom can dismiss. She placed the letter in the center of the table. This isn't testimony. It's testimony from the grave. She stepped back, and still, no one said a word, not the judge, not the clerk, not the press, because they weren't watching a defense. They were witnessing a funeral. And it had just begun. The silence had settled like fog, thick and unmoving. And in that stillness, Jasmine Crockett reached once more into her briefcase, not with trembling fingers, not with hesitation, but with the steady rhythm of someone who knew exactly what came next. This time, it wasn't a handwritten letter. It wasn't stained with grief or folded by a mother's hands. It was colder, louder, more dangerous. A government file. The red stripe across the front still read "Classified" in bold capital letters, but someone had drawn a single black line through it, "Declassified." She placed it on the table, opened the cover slowly. The pages whispered like ghosts. "These documents were declassified 7 days ago," she said, holding up the first page. "They weren't supposed to be, and believe me, some people are very upset that they are." Justice Thomas didn't move. Operation Hollow River. I don't expect everyone in this room to know what that means. That's the point. They made sure you wouldn't. She walked slowly toward the exhibit screen and tapped the first page. "This is the mission log from the night Darius Wilkins died." The room shifted. People sat straighter. It says, "Subject showing signs of life during extraction. Field medic notified. No follow-up recorded." A beat. "Let me translate that," Jasmine said, now walking away from the screen and locking eyes with the jury. "That means he was still alive." Gasps spread. He didn't die on impact. He didn't die in a firefight. He was breathing, and they left him. The jury shifted in their seats. Several leaned forward as if trying to get closer to the truth itself. No one called for a medevac. No one initiated CPR. No one even wrote down what time he stopped breathing. It was like he stopped existing the moment they decided it was easier that way. She held up a second page. "This document is a correspondence from Strat Defense. That's the private contractor assigned to oversee logistics during Hollow River." She walked the paper over to the bailiff, who passed it to the judge. "Take a look at the third line, Your Honor, right beneath the list of operational objectives." Justice Thomas's eyes scanned the page, and then he stopped. A muscle in his jaw twitched. Jasmine spoke. "It says, minimize post-op exposure. All excess civilian or military engagement flagged for redaction. Do you know what that means?" She looked around the courtroom. "It means Darius Wilkins was planned to disappear." A woman in the gallery choked back a sob. An aide scribbled furiously. "There's more," Jasmine said, her tone lowering. She returned to her briefcase and lifted out a photograph. A grainy image. Blurry but unmistakable. 2 men seated at a white-clothed table. Crystal glasses. File folders. One of them was Leonard Kenner, CEO of Strat Defense. The other, Justice Clarence Thomas. A pin could have dropped and echoed off the walls. The timestamp read, 8 months ago, Georgetown. "I'll let the picture speak for itself," Jasmine said. No one spoke. Even the guards at the back had leaned in. Jasmine stepped forward. Her voice dropped to a hush. "This is not about politics. It's not about me. It's about the deliberate erasure of a soldier, of a son, and of every file someone hoped would never surface." She looked directly at the judge. "You called me here to stand trial." She spread the documents out like cards. "I'm not the one who should be." The silence was no longer reverent. It was angry, alive, crackling with the weight of betrayal. Someone in the gallery stood, a man in a suit, his eyes red. He whispered, "He was my cousin." The judge looked up. But Jasmine wasn't finished. She opened one last folder. Inside was a printout, an email chain, internal DOJ correspondence. Subject line, suppression protocol, media fallout preparedness. One sentence was highlighted. "If Crockett resists, we can make an example of her." Jasmine let it hang there, then said simply, "I resist." She gathered the papers, folded them once, set them in the center of the table beside Eloise's letter, and then stepped back. Her voice was steady. "Now, America knows what you tried to bury." And from that moment on, the trial wasn't about her. It was about them, and it wasn't going to end the way they planned. The courtroom doors creaked open, and no one expected what came next. She wasn't on the schedule. She wasn't escorted in by security. She didn't ask permission, but the moment she entered, everything stopped. Eloise Wilkins. She didn't look like a threat. She was barely over 5 feet tall, dressed in a dark gray church dress and orthopedic shoes. Her hair was silver, tucked in a bun, and she leaned on a wooden cane with a worn rubber tip. But she moved like a woman who had already walked through every fire and didn't fear the smoke anymore. Every head turned. The press didn't dare snap photos. Even the judge didn't interrupt, because everyone in that room, on some level, knew this woman had earned her time. Jasmine Crockett stepped aside without a word. Eloise took the stand, adjusted the microphone herself, and then looked directly at Justice Thomas. Her voice was clear. "I buried my son," she said, "and I buried the truth with him." A murmur spread, but quickly silenced itself. No one dared move. "They told me he died instantly, that he didn't suffer, that it was clean." She shook her head, her eyes steady. "But now I know." She pulled a folded photo from her purse, one the world had never seen. Darius, 19, in uniform, standing beside an old Chevy with a bumper sticker that read, "Proud Army Mom." He wanted to be a mechanic after the Army. He used to fix bikes in the neighborhood. Sometimes he'd give them away just because he said, no kid should grow up without wheels. She placed the photo on the witness stand. That child loved this country. He believed in rules. He followed them until they got him killed. A sob escaped from the back. One of the court aides covered her mouth. Eloise didn't flinch. "You all wear suits and sit in chairs with names on them. But my boy, he sat in a foxhole while you debated what to call it." She turned to the jury. "I don't want money. I don't want revenge. I just want you to stop pretending this never happened." The room was no longer a courtroom. It was a sanctuary. Next, Jasmine called Susan Hale, a nurse, a former military medic. Her voice shook, but her words were clear. "I was there when Darius came in," she said. "He was breathing. His eyes were open. He was whispering something about his mom." She paused. He said, "Tell her I'm okay," over and over. "Tell my mama I'm okay." Dissolved into emotion, not chaos, but reckoning. Susan looked at Jasmine. "No one told the truth. I'm here now because I couldn't keep lying to myself." Then came the final blow, the audio. Jasmine nodded to her aide, who placed a speaker on the table and pressed play. A hiss of static, then a voice. Clarence Thomas. "If the mother pushes too hard, shut it down. She won't last long in the media. Give her something small, just enough to shut her up." The room convulsed. One of the jurors gasped. A journalist whispered, "Oh my God." Jasmine let the silence drag, then walked across the room. She picked up a chair, not just any chair, a wooden kitchen chair, old, worn, and scratched. She placed it next to the stand. "This," she said, "is where Darius sat every night for dinner." She placed her hand gently on the backrest. It was the last place he laughed, the last place he dreamed, and it's been empty for 2 years. A tear slid down her cheek. Not because of war, but because of silence. The crowd didn't applaud. They wept. Jasmine didn't break. She let them sit in it, let the weight of everything land where it needed to. Then, out of the gallery, came one last surprise. A boy, no more than 8. He wore an oversized blazer and held something in his hand. He walked up to Jasmine, looked up. "My brother died too," he said. "They never told us why." He held out a tarnished military medal. "You told the truth. You should have this." And Jasmine, who had stood strong through letters, files, evidence, and betrayal, cried. She knelt, took the medal, held it like a sacred relic. She didn't thank him. She didn't speak, because there was nothing left to say. The silence didn't break immediately. It lingered, thick, sacred, like something holy had happened, and no one dared be the first to breathe. Jasmine Crockett still knelt, her hand wrapped around that tarnished metal like it was the only thing keeping her connected to the ground. The little boy stood beside her, shoulders squared like he understood the weight of what he'd just done. In the gallery, people wept openly, not from pity, from resonance, from memory. They weren't crying for Darius alone. They were crying for every son and daughter whose name had never made the news, for every folded flag sent home without explanation, for every mother still sitting in a dark room, waiting for answers that would never come. Justice Thomas didn't say a word. He didn't gavel. He didn't dismiss. He sat, frozen. The weight of the evidence, the audio, the faces, the boy. It was all too much, and it was just enough. The court clerk looked to the judge, waiting for instruction, but none came. The silence had become its own verdict. Outside, word had already spread. Crowds had formed, veterans in uniform, mothers holding framed photos, young people waving signs that read, "Tell the truth," and "He was more than a file." By the time Jasmine stepped out onto the courthouse steps, she was no longer a defendant. She was a symbol. She didn't raise her fists. She didn't chant. She simply held the medal high, and the crowd went silent. A wave of reverence swept over them. Thousands stood shoulder to shoulder. Some cried. Some saluted. A man in his 70s removed his cap and placed it over his heart. A woman whispered to her daughter, "Remember this moment. Remember her face." Jasmine didn't speak. She walked down the steps, through the crowd, and into history. News cameras rolled, but for once they didn't chase. They just watched. 3 hours later, the headline dropped. Justice Clarence Thomas resigns from the bench. No press conference, no farewell statement. Just a folded resignation letter handed to the Chief Justice in private and a quiet car ride out of public life. Commentators argued, politicians scrambled. But for everyday people, the meaning was simple. The silence had finally cost someone power. In the days that followed, something remarkable began to happen. A memorial appeared, not in marble or gold, but in black granite. A wall, placed quietly in a corner of Arlington National Cemetery. No fanfare, no ceremony, just names. Names that had once been redacted. Darius Wilkins, James Holloway, Veronica Cruz, dozens more, each carved with the care of someone trying to return stolen dignity. People left flowers, letters, a toy truck, a single army boot, and one note written in a child's handwriting, "You are not forgotten." Jasmine visited the wall at sunrise. She wore no makeup. No cameras followed. She knelt, touched Darius's name, and left the boy's medal there, resting gently beneath the engraving. Then she turned and walked away, hand over her heart. Weeks later, at her small home in Dallas, a letter arrived. No return address, just one line of handwriting. "You brought my son home, not in a box, but in truth. Thank you. E.W." Jasmine read it 3 times before placing it on her nightstand beside a framed photo of her father in uniform. That evening, she and her niece baked cookies, oatmeal with too many raisins. As they placed them on a cooling rack, her niece asked, "Can we send these to the soldiers in heaven?" Jasmine smiled, tears welling up. "Yes, baby, yes we can." They wrapped them in wax paper, added a note, "In honor of those who never got to come home. We see you. We remember." And in that kitchen, on that quiet night, healing began. If this story moved you, don't let it end here. Share it. Speak about it. Leave a comment with the name of someone you remember, someone who mattered. Because truth isn't always loud. Sometimes it sits in silence, waiting for someone to finally tell it. And when that day comes, the world doesn't explode. It exhales. Because it's not just about justice in courtrooms. It's about dignity at the dinner table. It's about empty chairs, and the courage it takes to say, "He was here, and you will not forget him."